Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor to unify China, is both a source of closure and a symbol of supreme power in an era transitioning between chaos and order. But he is also one of the names that raises the most questions, if not the most, in history. If he had not died suddenly in 210 BCE, if he had an additional 30 years to continue his unification project, to correct mistakes, to perfect the system and shape civilization, would the situation in China have been different? Would the Qin Dynasty have lasted longer, and would he become a great enlightened ruler instead of being remembered only for the Great Wall, forced labor, and harshness? This story is a journey into possibility, where a small if opens up a parallel stream of history. I invite you to imagine and reflect with me. In 210 BCE, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor to unify China, died during an eastern tour. His sudden departure not only ended the life of a powerful individual but also triggered a succession crisis, leading to the rapid collapse of the Qin Dynasty just over a decade after its establishment. To understand what would change if he lived 30 more years, we must first look back at the country's overall situation in the moment of his passing. The Qin state had unified the 6 states for less than 11 years. Under his rule, a new empire formed, with centralized power, a unified administrative system, and standardized writing, currency, and measurements, unprecedented achievements in Chinese history. However, behind the glamorous appearance of a unified nation was rising discontent among the people. The construction of the Great Wall, along with the Yiping Palace and lavish tombs, required massive labor forces. People from newly annexed regions, especially from Chu and Zhao, felt harshly treated. Heavy taxes, endless forced labor, and strict laws sowed seeds of rebellion in society. In the court, power was absolutely concentrated in the emperor. Qin Shi Huang did not establish an empress or clearly designate a successor. His sons, like Fusu, were assigned to guard the frontiers but were not involved in internal governance. This created a major gap in the power transition mechanism, so after his death, the eunuch Zhao Yao, along with General Li Si and the second son Hu Hai, forged an edict, placing Hu Hai on the throne as Qin Shi. Hu Hai, young and incompetent, manipulated by Zhao Yao, quickly plunged the Qin Dynasty into chaos. Peasant uprisings like those of Chen Sheng, Wu Guang, and others erupted, leading to disintegration within just a few years. Looking back at that time, it can be said that Qin Shi Huang's death not only ended a life, but also toppled the sole pillar of power for the newly established empire. However, if he had lived longer, things could have been very different. With 30 more years, Qin Shi Huang could have stabilized the rear, adjusted policies, trained a successor, and, most importantly, maintained the presence of a central authority strong enough to suppress any seeds of rebellion. His centralization policies, if given more time to integrate into daily life and be adjusted based on reality, could have transformed the Qin Dynasty from a short-lived empire into a long-lasting dynasty like a Han or Tang. The issue then was not with the reforms themselves but the lack of time for them to take root. Another important point is the policy for intellectuals and scholarship. The burning of books and burying of scholars alienated the intellectual class, depriving the state of spiritual resources to consult. If Qin Shi Huang had lived longer, he might have recognized this mistake and corrected it, fostering the development of legalist ideology to serve the rule of law, rather than eliminating all dissent. On the other hand, the bureaucratic system at that time still relied heavily on military achievements. Those with battle merits were promoted, but there was no clear examination system. With time, Qin Shi Huang could have been the first to lay the foundation for a professionalized bureaucracy, thereby maintaining the loyalty and efficiency of local governments. In summary, 210 BCE was a fateful turning point. The Qin Empire at that time was an unfinished project, a grand political structure but not yet stable. And if that great architect had 3 more decades, the foundation of a unified China might have been deeper, broader, and sturdy enough to withstand the storms of history. Suppose Qin Shi Huang had not died in 210 BCE but continued to rule for 3 more decades. China's political and social landscape might have entered a phase of stable and unprecedented expansion. The starting point for this scenario would be eliminating the factors that led to his early death, such as court tensions, an irregular lifestyle, and excessive mental pressure. If these factors were controlled, for example, through improved health,
better time management, and a stable court, his lifespan could have exceeded 60, even reaching 80. The first thing to emphasize is that with 30 more years of rule,
Qin Shi Huang could thoroughly perfect the central government apparatus, eliminating internal destabilizing factors. Zhao Gao, the manipulator who later caused the Qin Dynasty's collapse, could have been dealt with early if Qin Shi Huang had lived longer,
as he was famously strict and intolerant of those who deceived and manipulated state affairs.
Removing Zhao Gao would pave the way for more transparent administrative reforms.
Next was the potential for restructuring the personnel system.
During those 30 years, Qin Shi Huang could reorganize the bureaucracy, not just based on military achievements but also on administrative capability. This could be the initial step in forming a primitive examination system to select talents,
which became the foundation for later dynasties like Han and Tang.
Regarding people's livelihood policies after unifying the country, he no longer had to concentrate all financial resources on warfare. National resources could be redirected for agricultural development, restoring people's livelihoods, and most importantly, reducing corporate labor burdens. If policies of easing people's burdens were implemented,
public discontent would significantly decrease,
further strengthening loyalty to the court. During those 3 decades,
he would also have time to reflect on mistakes that harmed the empire's legitimacy.
The policy of burning books and burying scholars, asserting legalists,
caused social knowledge to be disrupted. If corrected, he could proactively control ideology, without completely eliminating other schools of thought,
thereby creating a foundation for a government with both strength
and moral persuasiveness. Another important aspect was border security and territorial expansion. With longer lifespan,
Qin Shi Huang could intensify the subjugation of the Zhongyu in the north
and expand southward, where the Baihui tribes remained independent. The construction of vital routes, including precursors to the Inland Silk Road, could begin earlier, helping commerce flourish,
thereby enriching the national treasury and strengthening state power. In summary, if Qin Shi Huang lived 30 more years,
the combination of governance experience, military strength,
and centralized management capability would give him the opportunity to systematically rebuild the empire.
This wasn't just about extending his reign, but about creating a truly solid foundation for a transitional dynasty
between the warring period and long-term political civilization. With an additional 30 years of rule, Qin Shi Huang could lead the Qin Empire beyond its founding phase into a period of stability, development, and state system perfection.
A truly mature imperial model. In that context, initially controversial policies could be improved and adjusted to fit reality and public psychology, thereby creating a state strong in institutions, efficient in management, and structurally sustainable. First, the Qin administrative apparatus could transform from a machine operating on absolute commands into an efficient, clearly stratified, and stable management system. The commissary county system would be perfected with capable officials, trained and tested regularly. A strict penal code still exists but is applied flexibly, more for deterrence than blind oppression.
One notable political foundation is the consolidation of the rule of law model.
The ideology of state management is based on strict law, rather than sentiment or lineage.
During these 3 decades, the rule of law could be reinforced by a political administrative education system,
where officials and students are trained to understand and apply the law systematically.
This would pave the way for the formation of a professional bureaucratic class that the later Han Dynasty inherited.
Economically, the Qin Empire could enter a period of recovery and development.
After ceasing conquest campaigns, the court could shift focus to rebuilding agriculture, irrigation, and transportation.
Expanded and transformed canal systems, roads, and granaries would facilitate smooth flow of goods from one region to another. The state controlled strategic commerce but allowed merchants to operate freely within legal limits.
Transportation and communication would be upgraded. The main road, the straight road connecting Shenyang and the Nanyu region, would be widened and maintained,
enabling rapid military movement, efficient administrative management, and strong interregional trade.
Host stations and information reporting systems would also be expanded throughout the territory. On the other hand, ideological control could shift from suppression to guidance. Qin Shi Huang might, instead of suppressing other doctrines, reconcile them by establishing a common academic system serving legal governance. Scholars were allowed to develop ideas within the framework of serving the court, paving the way for a new, more flexible intellectual environment. Particularly, the role of the military in the state would also change. Instead of focusing on war, the military becomes a tool for maintaining order, supporting construction, and ensuring border security. Generals would be strictly controlled in power to avoid the risk of rebellion, a lesson from the rise of generals during the Warring States period. With all these factors, the Qin Empire after 30 years of Qin Shi Huang's rule would no longer be a brutal state of force, but become a more modern model of national governance for the era. This would set a precedent for subsequent dynasties to inherit, improve, and lead China into a more stable phase of civilization. If Qin Shi Huang had lived longer, his legacy would be completely different from the brutal, autocratic image later generations often attach to him. Establishing an efficient administrative apparatus, combined with territorial expansion and stable control of border regions, would make him one of the greatest architects of ancient China. The greatest legacy is the institutionalized centralized state model, no longer relying on his charisma but capable of operating independently with successors. The long-term survival of the Qin Dynasty in this scenario would completely change history. Perhaps the Han Dynasty would never appear, or today, it would bear Qin characteristics, inheriting the entire legal system, bureaucracy, and political mindset of Qin. In culture, Qin Shi Huang's image would be recorded as the founder of unified Chinese civilization, rather than a dictator. Great works like the Great Wall, road systems, and irrigation would no longer be symbols of forced labor, but evidence of visionary national planning and development spanning centuries. In thought and philosophy, he reconciled legal governance with other ideologies. Qin Shi Huang's legacy would not only be rigidity and control, but also a form of enlightened governance, where the state is strong in organization yet flexible in thought. This could have a long-term impact on how later dynasties built their political foundations. Most importantly is a precedent that long-term stability and development do not necessarily have to be tied to soft humanistic values, but can start from decisiveness and high organization, as long as they aim for national goals, not personal interests. With 30 more years to perfect all policies and institutions, Qin Shi Huang can return China into a long-lasting and stable superpower very early. Instead of going through cycles of unification, fragmentation, and recovery as real history unfolded. History does not give us the chance to go back, but imagination helps us broaden our vision beyond the framework of what happened. Assuming Qin Shi Huang lived another 30 years is not just an intriguing parallel story, but a thought experiment on the role of leadership, time, and vision. We might have known a Qin Empire not only strong militarily, but also institutionally sustainable and culturally profound. However, the word "if" remains a limitation. It opens many perspectives that cannot change reality. The Qin Dynasty collapsed, not due to lack of rule of law or strength, but because there wasn't enough time to make what was built sustainable. Nevertheless, imagining a different scenario doesn't make us deny history but helps us understand it more deeply. Qin Shi Huang, in this assumption, is not just a symbol of absolute power, but proof of something greater. That any empire wanting to endure needs someone who can both create and have enough time to perfect their vision.
If the veil stirred, subscribe and meet the next encounter.